Hello, hello. It's Justin Colletti of SonicScoop. Thanks for joining me for this week's episode of the SonicScoop podcast. And today, it's going to be like a story time hour. We're going to go deep on a subject. I've got an episode prepared for you called The 7 Deadly Sins of Music Production. I actually did an episode a while back. It might be a couple years old now. Really popular one called The 7 Deadly Sins of Mixing. And in that one, it was really a response to someone reached out and said, hey, Justin, what are the things that you find as a mastering engineer that come up in mixes again and again? What are some of the most common things that go wrong so we can avoid them in our mixes? And that's what that episode, The 7 Deadly Sins of Mixing, is about. Really targeted, and it just happened to be 7. It came out to I'm looking for the things that happen again and again, and it really is 7 things. If I did a 8 or if I did 6, it wouldn't have been true. Ever since I did that episode, I've wanted to zoom out and do it on music production more generally. But when we zoom out and go wide and figure out those things that are really holding us back in our whole careers as musicians, music producers, audio engineers, or really honestly in any creative field, when we go that broad, music production generally, we have to go broad with our 7 things. And our 7 deadly sins today are going to be the actual 7 deadly sins. Yes, we're going to do pride, lust. That one's a weird one. We're going to do that one in a very different way than you might expect. Now that I've said that we're going to do lust in a different way than you'd expect, I wonder if you might now expect what I'm going to do, or maybe I did that so I could trick you. I don't know. All that I know is you don't mess with a Sicilian when death is on the line. All right, we're going to do envy, we're going to do sloth, we're going to do all of these because we're looking at this not in a religious sense. This is meant to be, accessible to anyone, whether super secular, atheist, religious, whatever. But I really think that the 7 deadly sins, it's almost a bit of a misnomer. They're not really sins so much as they are habits of mind. Usually when we think of a sin, it's an action, a wrongdoing. But each of these 7 deadly sins is a habit of mind we fall into, and we don't actually have to specifically do something wrong to be experiencing one of these 7 deadly sins. They are ways of thinking, ways of processing the world that are wrong and lead us in the wrong direction, don't lead us in fruitful directions. And just being able to put a name on these things, being able to say to yourself, oh man, that's pride effing with me again. Or, oh, I'm starting to get that envy feeling. Just recognizing them can help us really reset our whole framing of an issue that we're running into and lead us to much more success. We'll get into sponsor talk and all that stuff later on. Know that we have courses and you can join, hit the like and subscribe and all that stuff. And their sponsors, Soundtoys, Lewitt Audio, and who else? Ultimate Support this week. But we'll talk about those guys later because I want to get right into the big mamma jamma, what they call the mother of all sins. And that is pride, the sin that leads to all other sins. Or in this case, the habit of mind, the mental trap that we fall into, that all of us fall into this one. And this is the number one thing that holds people back from success in music. It holds people back from success in audio and in life in general. And it's definitely something that I've had to overcome and continue to have to overcome. You're never going to overcome these things and be done with the battle forever. That's not how it works. They're going to come back. But pride is that idea of, let me see if I can encapsulate in a sentence. The problem with pride is that you can't get to where you want to go if you're pretending that you're already there. And pride stops so many of us in our tracks from succeeding with what we actually need to do, the steps we need to go through to create a career for ourselves, to get really good at mixing, to get really good at an instrument. Pride, telling ourselves that we're not already just good enough, but better than good enough, and we shouldn't have to stoop to the same things that others have to stoop to because we're too good, we're too big, we're too talented. Oh man. And the worst you're going to get hit with pride is when it's partly true, when you are exceptionally talented. And I have seen people be held back by their talents more than people get held back for lack of talent. Let me say that again. When it comes to succeeding in music, you're more likely to get held back by your talent than by your lack of talent. This sounds crazy to people because you think, oh man, talent, you got to be talented at music to succeed in music. Well, you've probably got to have some aptitude. If you are legit tone deaf, you're probably not going to become a great singer. But then again, there's some singers who have succeeded despite not being great singers. I've run into this problem with pride, and I think one of the reasons I succeeded at being an audio engineer and a general music production guy, rather than succeeding at being a musician, is that I had less pride when it came to audio and music production. When it came to audio and I started messing around with the 4-track, we're going to do some story time here. I'm going to give you some examples to flesh this stuff out. Hopefully you can relate to some of them. When I started messing around with the 4-track and started learning audio, I was confronted with the fact that I didn't know what an aux send was or how it worked, what a bus was. And this concept was so foreign to me. The idea that you could take an audio signal and split it in two and have it go to two different places at once. This is crazy talk. How would that even work? I couldn't even wrap my head around that idea. And here I was thinking I was a relatively smart guy. Couldn't understand that. And my early recordings, they really sounded like the songs were coming through a pillow. And I had to listen to them and go like, wow, this isn't good. And one of the reasons I was able to say this isn't good is because I had no expectation of myself that I should be good. And I could look at it honestly and be like, yeah, I'm not where I want to be. And this idea of going into audio, knowing that I knew nothing, helped me learn everything. And anywhere else I've succeeded in life, even if it's modest successes, whether it's in jiu-jitsu or learning about economics or kind of trying to get my head around my finances, all that stuff. The only reason I was able to get some mastery in those areas is because those are the areas where I admitted to myself, I know absolutely nothing. I'm terrible. I suck. I don't necessarily even have a natural aptitude. So I'm going to have to start as if I know nothing. And that humbling of oneself and not putting yourself down. Not false humility. False humility is putting yourself down, hoping that someone else will compliment you, right? We all do that sometimes too, right? Real humility is recognizing where you actually are. False humility would be pretending you're even lower than you are. Real humility is to say, wait a second. If I want to get into understanding finance or economics, do I know what money is or why it's worth anything at all? That was a question I had to ask myself when I wanted to learn economics and when I wanted to learn finance. I had to ask myself the question, wait a second, why are stocks worth anything? It doesn't seem like you can do anything with them. Are they just like Pogs? Like with Pogs, you could like trade Pogs, or with Magic the Gathering cards or something, like you use them in a game. Maybe there's some value. Why are stocks worth anything at all? And there's an answer to that question. But you know what? I've talked to people who have bachelor's degrees in economics who cannot give an intelligent answer to the question, why are stocks worth anything at all? If anyone wants to know the answer to that question, we can go into it in the comments. I'm not going to give you the answer here because that would be a whole nother podcast. But do you see how it was easy for me with audio because I admitted to myself, I don't know this stuff. And that allowed me to learn everything. And now, not being prideful, not boasting, matter of factly, there are very few questions about audio and how it works, about how the science of sound works, about different people's approaches to doing things, what are the common best practices in different schools and in different genres. Those are questions I can answer for you because each one of them I had to admit I didn't know the answer to. This is sometimes tricky for people who have talent in music. And I had some talent in music. But once you start identifying with the idea that you have talent and you think that you should already be good enough, and you're not able to humble yourself to the level of there's so much I don't know yet, there's so much I could do better, that number one sin of pride will mess with you and get in the way. So what is the antidote with pride? It's humility. It's accurately stating where you are. Not pretending you already are where you want to be. Taking actual stock of where you are, taking actual stock of where you want to be, where you want to wind up, and then recognizing that a path between the two has to be created and you don't know what it is yet. That's humility. Humility is also recognizing that other people know things that you don't know. Other people have skills that you don't have. Which leads us to the second big deadly sin. And this is the other big killer when it comes to music production and audio. I'm doing these in the order of how much I think they affect specifically people in music production. And this one, man, this number 2 one, maybe it's even tied for number 1. And it is envy. Oh, this is a big one, especially in the studio. Especially when you're always looking at how many other toys the other guys got. And there are these magic toys that would just make everything better if you had them, right? And it's not only the magic toys. We also know it's the advantages those other people had. Those rich kids who succeeded because they had everything handed to them on a silver platter. I have a whole episode about that one. If you ever are really angry about rich kids in the music industry, just Google Colletti or SonicScoop, rich kids in the music industry. I think it's my best podcast episode ever. Not one of the most popular ones, but it's one of the most helpful things I've ever done for a lot of people. I think the comments in that one show it. So if you want to go really deep into this one about envy, check out that episode, Rich Kids in the Music Industry. But I've heard it said that jealousy is wanting what someone else has. But envy is even worse. Envy is not wanting the other guy to have it to begin with. Oh man, that's dark, isn't it? Not even wanting others to have the advantages that they do. And this is a dark one because a lot of us, specifically, even more so in the past, when there seemed like more barriers to entry in the world of audio and music production, it really seemed like you needed all the fancy toys, and the reason your record didn't sound great was because you didn't have all of the toys, or you didn't have all the advantages, you didn't have all of the time, maybe that someone who's independently wealthy had. Man, there's so many success stories that just fly in the face of this idea of you can't make it unless you're rich, you can't make great sounding records unless you have all the gear. Obviously, patently not true, and we could do a whole entire episode about that. And there's also so many examples to the contrary where I've met people who had the trust fund, they had the inheritance, they built the fancy studio, and nothing came of it. But the big thing with envy is not wanting others to have their advantages. And for each of these 7 deadly sins, I mean, when I use the term 7 deadly sins, this comes out of a Western religious tradition, that idea, that terminology. But I think it's something that transcends all cultures. It's just a great way of thinking about our negative habits of mind. But in the tradition that the 7 deadly sins come from, they also have something called the 7 virtues, 4 cardinal virtues and 3 other virtues that we could talk about in some other podcast episode. So each one of these sins has a virtue that's the opposite of it. And the one for envy is very surprising. For pride, the virtue that's the opposite of pride is obvious, right? Humility. But what's the opposite of envy? What is the virtue that's the opposite of envy? Envy, this one was really illuminating for me when I read it. The virtue that's the opposite of envy in this 1,500-year-old tradition, virtue that is the opposite of envy is kindness. And then you have to go back and think, wait a second, what even is kindness? Because you're not going to understand these 7 deadly sins and these 7 virtues unless you first humble yourself to say, well, do I even know what kindness is? Isn't that being nice? Isn't that what kindness is? No, that's not what kindness means. Look at the etymology of it. Whenever you want to really understand what a word means, where it comes from, where its heart is, look at its etymology, its root. Kind, kin. To be kind is to be like someone else. To show someone kindness is to recognize that you are like them and they are like you. That we're close to being kin. The antidote to envy is to looking at other people who have what you want and saying, good for you, brother. Right? That's awesome. Also kindness in the respect that, well, what one man can do, what one man can achieve, another man can do, another man can achieve. I'm like you. I can have that too. Often envy comes from us not being kind to others in that we're not seeing ourselves like them, not allowing us to be happy for them. That's one respect in which envy and kindness are opposites. But another way that envy comes up is we secretly see others that have something we don't have, and we recognize that we don't have it ourselves. And rather than admit to ourselves that that hurts and that there's a gap between where we are and where they are, and we actually want to close that gap potentially. Rather than recognize that we can do that, we see it as that's unattainable for me. What you have is unattainable for me, so I don't want you to have it. But if you were actually kind, not only would you be nice in the respect that you want good things to happen to them, but you'd be kind in the respect of recognizing that you are like them, and what they have achieved, you can also achieve. And not believing that about yourself is also one of the things that leads to envy. So when you feel that envy bubble up inside of you, you've got to think kindness in both of those ways. Kindness as in good for you, brother, but also kindness as in I'm kind of like you, and if that's something I really want, then I can get it for myself. Or, and here's a third way, families, kin, are made up of very many people who are different from one another. Sure, there's similarities in your family. As you can probably tell, we're how many minutes into this episode, and I've been talking nonstop for 16 minutes. Could you guess that I come from a family of people who talk? Right? I come from a family of very verbal people. Also a family, at least on one side, of very musical people. But within that, there's also so much difference. In my family, I'm the quiet one. I'm the listener in my family. You get me together in a room with my immediate family, and I'm doing less talking than all they're doing. Which is, I think, I hope, what at least early on made me into a very good interviewer, because I would be willing to really just listen to people talk for a long time because I was so used to it. Now sometimes I get the complaints on my podcast interviews that I talk too much because I treat it like this is, I don't know, the Joe Rogan podcast or something that's like a conversation where I'm not just interviewing people, having a conversation with them, because I'm bringing people in front of my audience and giving them my perspective as well, instead of just being a conduit. But I digress. Inside of a family, although there are a lot of ways in which you're alike, you kind of often have the brainy one or the mischievous one or the quiet one. Like, people play different roles inside a family. And although each one of those family members may seem like they have a lot in common when you compare them to the outside world, within that family circuit, they can't all play the same role. Dad and mom and brother and sister and big brother and little brother and big sister and baby sister don't all play the same role in the family. And kindness, recognizing that we're like one another and that we're supposed to treat each other like we're like one another, allows us to recognize that we also have differences from one another, and those differences are welcome. So sometimes when we feel envy, we can feel appreciation, where you actually don't want to close the gap between you and someone else. You want to take advantage of the gap between you and someone else. Someone else has a ton of gear. They, have a great studio. You don't. Well, they have something you don't, but you probably also have something they don't. And how can you trade with them? When you see someone that has something that you don't, can you think of the things that you have that they don't? And how can you make trades with people? These are ways of being kind instead of envious. I've harped on pride and envy because I think they're the two biggest killers in our field. But all of the rest of these are funny ones too, and important ones. And lust is the next one that we're going to get into. Are we going to get super dirty on this one when I go into lust? Where are we going to go with this one? This is interesting. We're going to look at lust from a couple different angles. But before I do, isn't this a weird spot to give a shout out to our sponsors? I am lusting for you to hit the like button. If there was a lust button on this podcast, I would implore you to hit it. But since there's only a like button, hit it twice. Actually, that would make you unlike it. So hit it at least 3 times. Hit it an odd number of times. Just one will suffice. If you hit like, click the subscribe button, click the notifications bell. It will help you see more podcasts like this one, and will also help spread this message to others who might need it. The big thing you can do for us, if you're on an audio-only version of the podcast, like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, please consider giving us a 5-star rating and review. If you listen to like more than 5 episodes of this podcast and you love it, and that's like most people who listen to like more than 2, seem to like go listen to all of them. If you're doing that, don't just email me and tell me how great it is. Please go and leave us a 5-star rating and review. It really does help us spread the word, and I'm eternally grateful for it. Also, the best thing that you can do to sponsor this podcast is to sponsor yourself. Check out one of our great full-length courses like Mixing Breakthroughs, Mastering Demystified, Compression Breakthroughs, EQ Breakthroughs. Each one of them is guaranteed to change the way that you work forever, for the better, or your money back. They really do change lives. I have no qualms plugging these whatsoever, because every time I sell a bunch of these, I get a bunch of emails that say, Justin, that actually helped. Oh my goodness. Like I just had a leapfrog moment. Mixing Breakthroughs, and especially does that for, the holistically mixing. But if you're struggling with compression or EQ, those are fantastic. If you want to get a hands on all things mastering Demystified is great for it. And if you want to go super deep on a regular basis, for super cheap, just $5 a month right now, you can become a member of this YouTube channel, show your support that way, or give a super thanks, but show your support by becoming a member of this channel. You also get great perks like members only Q&A sessions with guaranteed answers to your comments when you type them in on YouTube videos. We have mixed feedback sessions. We just did an epic one just a couple of weeks ago, and I think I'm going to be doing them even more regularly in this new year. So check that out. Also, big shout out and thanks to sponsors, Soundtoys, making some of my favorite creative mixing effects in the known universe. Try out anything they make for free for 30 days over at soundtoys.com. Also, big shout out and thanks to Lewitt Audio. I'm speaking to a very affordable, this is the Lewitt 440 Pure Vita edition. This one is a limited edition rainforest green color because some of the proceeds from this microphone on every one sold goes to buying and preserving rainforest land in Costa Rica, and something called the Rainforest of the Austrians, where they preserve rainforest land in kind of perpetuity. So definitely check that out. This is a really inexpensive one. I think it's like $250 or something like that. They make mics all the way up into the thousands of dollars. I think they have one that's as cheap as like $100. But the Lewitt line is just fantastic. All of them have this wonderful pop filter that magnetically attaches to the microphone. I really think every microphone company should just steal from Lewitt and do this design because it's the best pop filter design. And their shock mount design is awesome. The build quality on these is insane at every price point. I used their Pure Tube on the podcast for a while. Fantastic. Easily one of the best built and best designed mics for $1,000 I've ever checked out. And they really have stuff, all price ranges. Also, last shout out and thanks before we get into the rest of our deadly sins. And we have a bunch to go that are going to go quicker than these past two, because they're not the biggest killers in music, but they're pretty darn big. All right, ultimate support. I'm speaking right now into this Lewitt microphone on top of an ultimate support stand. These guys make stands that I've been using for literally a couple of decades. I have ultimate support stands that have been with me 20 years or more, and right now I have on my desk their deluxe broadcast boom stand. Probably the best built and best designed stand of this type that I have come across. So big thanks to those guys for getting the price to performance ratio right on all of their stuff. All right, let's get into our next one. Lust. Man, I'm going to take this from a side angle. We're not going to just go at it from the perspective of the sexual side of lust. And we will talk about that briefly, because I think that can be an issue in music and music production too. How? We'll touch on it. But real quick, before we even get into that, I want to talk a little bit about what I thought was one of the most corrosive forces in music production in the studio world when I was getting into this stuff. And something that I was a little bit addicted to. I'm ashamed to admit that I was addicted to. Yes, it's true. I would go to the computer and hope my girlfriend wasn't looking, because I would be pulling up Gear Sluts. The website, once known as Gear Sluts, has since been renamed Gear Space in the post-Me Too era. But it was for a long time known as Gear Sluts. And there would be, I would say predominantly men hunched over their laptops, like in a dark room. In my case, literally hoping my girlfriend wasn't looking at how much time I was spending on Gear Sluts. Reading comments, sometimes getting infuriated, sometimes getting envious, sometimes getting prideful. It really brings out all of these things, doesn't it? But I've heard it said that lust, in the conventional sense of lusting of the flesh, right? Sexual lust. That you're lusting when you're treating a person like an object. When you're treating a person like a means to your ends, that's lust. And I wonder if it can also work the other way with gear. Because with gear, it's almost like treating objects with the reverence, respect due to a human being. And that's what would happen on Gear Sluts. It would be treating gear with the reverence and respect due to a human being. Elevating gear to the status of talent, experience, taste, and always looking for a magic bullet of what am I doing wrong? What's the piece of gear that I don't have? And it would always come down to things like preamps. What's the preamp that I don't have that's separating my records from sounding like actually good records? And it was so weird, such a weird environment in Gear Sluts, because you'd be getting these responses from people, some of whom would be legit audio engineers and music producers with some real abilities. There was some of those who would comment. And there was a lot of engineers and producers without much experience who would comment just as forcefully and just as confidently and perhaps pridefully. And there would also be just like a whole lot of people who literally it's their job to sell gear or drum up lust for gear, commenting on what gear was the best and why this preamp was going to change everything about your sounds forever. And I wouldn't be surprised if of those three categories, like number 3 is like the most vocal part of the group. Like, I'm actually I make records. I work in the studio, and I'm also like the US distributor for brand X that we're talking about right now. But I'm just an anonymous name here, So this is not me trying to get wrathful or envious about Gear Sluts, although perhaps I could fall into either or both of those deadly sins. I'm going to fall into all of these sins, by the way, after we're done talking about these. Like, I'm not completely immune to them. I try to recognize them and sidestep them when I can, but they come up. They're habits of mind that hopefully we can do less and less frequently. But we only do that by not being prideful and acknowledging that they're going to come up. So that's the one big one in the studio world I want you to watch out for, is the lust for gear, the gear lust. There's a reason they named it Gear Sluts. This was not an accident. I mean, it might not have been methodical. They might have gone through a whole bunch of names and were like, ooh, Gear Sluts. That one feels right because it feels oh so wrong. So we've all lusted after gear. We've all attributed to it the powers and respect due to experience, due to bringing other talented people in. Because this is the thing that would bug me. People who are like, I just need to get a better preamp. And then you would hear the recordings and it's like, no, you need to start working with better musicians, or you need to become a better musician, or you need to make better EQ choices. It has nothing to do with your preamps. Like, your kick drum is way louder than your bass in a song where the kick drum isn't playing an interesting pattern of the basses. Like, have you thought about that yet? That said, the actual lust of the flesh also is potentially an issue in the music world. Musicians often are people who are high in creativity, and people who are high in creativity are often high in a personality trait called openness. Man, would you ever want to see this? There's another thing we could talk about, habits of mind, the 5 big personality traits that become more and more popular in recent years. They've been popularized by some extremely famous person who you've probably heard of, but there's good science behind them. And one of the personality traits, openness, this idea of being open to new experiences, open to aesthetic experiences, open to new ideas. Creative people, sometimes that openness also shows its face in intimate relationships between people. And I have met, and I've heard the story of artists where one of the reasons they got involved in music was because they thought it would help their prospects with the opposite sex. And realistically, it's mostly men getting into music for that reason. I've heard it said that what lust is to men, attention is to women. So sometimes women are less getting into music, hoping it'll expand their dating opportunities, but men are generally getting to music, at least some part of them, they think it'll help expand their dating opportunities. And there's some potential truth to that, and that can potentially be a positive thing. Hey, I'm not like a jock, but this is one area where I can show off like that I have some usefulness, some light inside of me, something to share with the rest of the world. That's awesome. But wanting to go specifically into music so that you can be part of this never-ending carousel of relationship after relationship after relationship after relationship that lasts like several hours, I don't think it's generally healthy. It's generally not a healthy way to live. But also, I don't think you can keep up making great music for a long time when that's the goal. Like if anything that you're doing with your music reminds you of a VH1 Behind the Music special from the 1990s about a band that was really big and had 2 big songs and then they all became alcoholics that went bankrupt, if there's like any part of their lifestyle that like you're chasing or trying to do, you probably shouldn't do that thing. So I would say, we'll get to this later when it comes to greed, but I would say the best reason to do music is because you love the puzzle of doing music and you feel like it's the place where you can contribute the most to the world and to others rather than specific things you can get out of it. We'll talk about that more in a minute. The next one after this, which dovetails nicely into lust, is gluttony. We're on our 4th deadly sin here. Let me see. Pride, envy, lust, gluttony. Yeah. And gluttony is an interesting one. We often think about gluttony as being eating too much. But there's more than one meaning to gluttony. And one way that gluttony can come up is just stuffing our faces, right? Eating way too much when we should already be done eating. But that's not the only way that gluttony comes up. And how does this make sense in music production? Why does eating too much have to do with music production? It doesn't directly. But it dovetails into this idea of lust, because one of the other meanings of gluttony is being too interested in the physical experience of eating. Like being too obsessed about getting the best or the most. This dovetails into this gear lust thing, because it is possible for you to be a glutton by obsessing over quality. And when I found that very interesting. When I was reading all these different perspectives about the 7 deadly sins over the course of 1,500 years or whatever, they've been around, slightly more than that. And going back even further, if you look at the 7 deadly sins coming out of some of the virtue ethics of ancient Greece and all that stuff. But gluttony, it sometimes comes up, this idea that you're obsessing too much about the quality of your experience. And this dovetails into the gear, because sometimes when we're obsessing about the minutia between 2 different preamps, between 2 different types of EQs, between 2 different compressor settings, that we're going down this rabbit hole of debating about quality of experience when we've already gone far down that rabbit hole enough. And I think gluttony is one of these ones where it's more of a matter of degree than an on-off. Right? With pride and with envy and with lust, it's kind of more of an on-off. But with gluttony, it's like, how do you know you've passed that spot into gluttony? It can be trickier for people. I'll tell you what, with food, for me specifically, when I don't have goals for how much I'm supposed to eat, I will eat until I feel full and then a little bit more. People who have more trouble with food than me will go to the point where they've eaten more than they need to and then keep on going. And this is the big thing with gluttony. You already know that you've done enough, but you keep on going anyway. And I think this is something that rears its head when it comes to gear, when it comes to obsessing about little tweaks that we're doing inside of a mix, when it comes to adding more and more instruments onto a mix and making these bloated arrangements where they're not adding things to the song anymore. In fact, we're taking away from the song by adding additional fat that keeps the song from really expressing its true spirit. When we don't know when to stop, or we've reached the point where we kind of know that we should stop, but we keep on going anyway. And the only answer I have to you for gluttony in music production is to give yourself a framework. Because I don't want you spending 3 weeks on mixing one song, or sometimes 3 months, or in the case of some of us, it's probably been 3 years, right? There's one song that we don't get done. Or we can spend hours twiddling with a kick drum EQ rather than making the song better. Or we can add element after element after element. These things are gluttony. The idea of comparing microphones, trying to find which is the best one for the singer, great, wonderful, you should do that. But should you be trying all 15 microphones in the studio when the singer's there with you? Should we be obsessing about our compressor settings and exactly which compressor to use on this instrument, whether we should boost by a half a dB or a full dB of EQ on this instrument for hours? And the only way I know out of this trap of gluttony is to come up with frameworks. When I want to lose weight, I tend to fluctuate somewhere between 150 pounds and 160 pounds. Sometimes when I want to compete in jiu-jitsu at a lower weight class, I'll go all the way down to 145 and I'll start to look like Skeletor. You can find a couple podcast episodes where I look a little bit like Skeletor because of it. But when I want to lose weight, the way that I have to do it is I have to track calories. I have to look at what I'm eating if I want to be sure that I'm going to end up losing weight. I can't just wing it. And I think the same thing comes true if you want to stop wasting too much time on little bits of minutia. And if you want to mix more quickly, if you want to stop adding to your productions once they're already great, you have to give yourself limitations and frameworks. So here's a couple of examples. If you're going to try out multiple mics on a singer, you try out 3. You take your 3 best guesses. But what if, like, mic number 7 in the closet would have been the best on this singer? You know what? It doesn't matter. The best of your 3 best guesses is good enough. The best of your 3 best guesses is good enough. You don't need to do better than that to make the best production that you're capable of making. Now, sometimes can you go a little further than that? You can say, well, we're trying to get this today in the studio. We have endless time. Today's the day where we're just going to try out all the mics on this thing. We're not even going to care about getting... Okay, great. If you've created an even bigger framework of we're not trying to get this project done over the next 2 days or the next 2 weeks, we're trying to get this project done over the next 2 or 3 months, and we can afford a day where we try out every microphone in the studio and we twiddle a lot. Great. If that's part of the larger framework of we're taking 2 months to make this album, we can have a mic singer day where we try out everything. But that only works within that framework. Otherwise, it can turn into Chinese democracy. The Guns N' Roses album, which I think actually came out, and the joke was that, China would have democracy before the album came out. I think did that end up being true? I don't know. I guess they kind of always voted the whole time, but we're supposed to vote for the person who's going to win or else you'd be in trouble. I don't know if it's different now or not. Feel free to tell me in the comments. All right, I digress again. Hopefully you like these digressions. Maybe I should give myself a framework about too many digressions in my podcast episodes. But the biggest frameworks I have for you on the mixing side, if that's what's messing you up and it's taking you days upon days to finish mixes or weeks upon weeks or months upon months, is the course mixing breakthroughs. But one of the biggest things I can give you is just to have this habit of mind that you have a specific amount of time in which you complete a mix of this type. A lot of the best mixers on the planet finish their mixes in 4 hours or 8 hours. Now, that said, they'll have assistants to help them out. Usually the assistants will do a whole bunch of preloading work that you're probably doing for yourself already that might take like a whole day of all of this work that you do. And it might take you days to do all of this prep work because you start doing the prep work when you've already started mixing and you haven't separated them out into 2 processes. One where I'm just doing prep and now I can spend an hour or 2 just doing prep and now it's set up beautifully. So now when I come back, fresh state of mind, I'm ready to actually mix. Now it's going to take me my 4 hours or my 8 hours. And you have a framework, a process, a predetermined process for how to do that. And you put these frameworks in place. If you go past your framework, you're probably going to feel a little bit guilty about it and say, I'm going too far. And you're probably not going to go all the way into gluttony. So same thing with me with actual food, right? If I'm tracking my calories and I'm supposed to eat no more than 2,300 calories today, if I go over to 2,500, I'm like, oh, damn, I kind of cheated a little bit and I'm a little bit over. But I didn't eat 3,500, which is what gluttony looks like. And which is what gluttony looks like when we let our inability to put constraints on how far we go with something get the better of us. Another thing about gluttony, we're going to go on to greed in a second. But another quick thing about gluttony before we do is that The opposite of gluttony is temperance, and that's doing the right things in the right amounts. So gluttony can also be not doing only too much of something, but sometimes doing too little of the right things can be akin to gluttony. It sounds a little weird and backwards, but if it truly is the reverse of temperance, that would be true. All right, greed. And this one dovetails into gluttony because greed is not knowing when to stop. But not just applying to food. That's a big thing about greed. Avarice, the idea of being after material possessions. Mammon, they called it in the old days. Being obsessed with attaining the finer things in life. Being obsessed with material gain. Now, most of us realistically aren't in music because we think it's going to make us millionaire, billionaire, cajillionaires. We probably don't think, most of us, that we're going to get insanely wealthy off of making music. Although if you do things right, I mean, I make a good multiple six-figure income just doing music and audio stuff. I've never done one of those episodes that some people do where it's like, do you want, like people in the personal finance would be like, space on YouTube, they're like, here's exactly how much I made this month and every month. I could do that. I don't want to do that. I've never have done it. I think it'd be a little weird in our space. But let's just say that if I did it, the reason I wouldn't do it is because I'd be embarrassed that I was showing off. Like I've done okay through audio and music stuff. I have a nice house, decent net worth, good annual income, all that stuff. Although it took many years to build to that place. Wasn't always that way. But greed would be not knowing when to stop with that and keeping on chasing material benefits to the detriment of other areas of life. Well, this is something we don't have to worry about with music production and audio, right? Not exactly. Because the way that I would frame greed in a broader way, where it's not just having to do with having the most riches and the nicest car and all that stuff, which I don't have and I don't aspire to have. Greed is, to me, valuing the outcome over the journey. That's what greed really means, is obsessing about the material outcomes of what you've done rather than the value of the journey to get there. So for instance, I have a gold record plaque here on the wall behind me. I have a platinum credit now. Should be getting platinum record next to that one too. Really excited that was going to cross that threshold in the year that just passed of 2023. We'll have my first platinum record on the wall shortly. So excited about that. But the reason I point these things out though is not because like I'm super proud to have the thing, or even that like I want to rest on my laurels and be like, oh, I did good. The only reason I like to have those things and show them off is because they're a credibility builder, because they allow me to do more of the thing that I like doing. And if I have some credibility in the eyes of my audience, people will come to me so that I can help them learn more. If I have more credibility in the eyes of my potential mastering clients, more people will be like, Justin, can you work on my next record? And I don't want to work on my next record so I can get the next platinum record or I can add another wing to the house. I want to work on the next record so that I can work on the next record. I want to get the next coaching call with a client where I can help them learn how to mix better because I want to do the next coaching call with the next client where I get to help them learn to mix better. And I swear, Scout's honor, I'm not just saying this to be a Boy Scout. Whenever I'm at my best, I legitimately want all the trappings of credibility and the trappings of success so I get more opportunities to do the thing that led to them. I don't need, multiple six figures of income or multiple gold records or multiple platinum records just because I want them. Although I do want those things because they allow me to keep on doing the thing that I like doing. And if that's the way that you can approach music and audio production, not being obsessed with the outcome for the outcome's sake, but being somewhat interested in the outcome because it facilitates you keeping on doing the things that you know that you want to be doing and should be doing and that are legitimately fulfilling for you to do. I mean, I think that's where real success comes from, is designing a day-to-day life for yourself that you enjoy living and that feels meaningful. And usually most of that meaning that you get out of life is going to come from, as cheesy as it sounds, it's going to come from helping others. It's going to come from being a meaningful part in someone else's meaning. And all of us doing that for each other at all times. I get way too sentimental and goody two-shoes if I go down the rabbit hole on that. So let's talk about some more dark shit. Excuse me, I don't usually curse in the podcast. I apologize. Got to put a disclaimer on this one. I said a 4-letter word. All right, I guess I am a Boy Scout. The next one is sloth. And sloth is not doing what you should when you should. And this is a problem for me sometimes. I seem to the outside world, sometimes I seem productive. There was a time where I was writing like 8 articles a month for different publications, and I was doing, a video a week on top of that, and I was working in the studio, and I was doing all this stuff. And people would say to me, like, Justin, how come you seem to be able to do all this stuff? You seem so busy all the time. And I'd be like, no, I'm afraid I'm not busy enough. Like, I'm not doing enough. I feel like I'm never doing anything. I feel like I've never accomplished anything. And that's why I'm doing all this stuff, or at least it appears to other people. But I wouldn't even recognize I was actually achieving and doing a lot of stuff. I would just notice the times where I was feeling the feeling of sloth, of I should be doing something, but I'm not. Now, what I'm describing can go pathological in the wrong direction, right? You can be so obsessed with constantly doing things that you have no peace. But you can also be on the opposite side of it, sloth. And sloth is really associated with sadness, with not doing the things that you should be doing and that you actually want to be doing. And the biggest thing in sloth is fear. Sloth can look like procrastination. Procrastination is our modern word for sloth, right? We used to use ugly words for ugly things, and now we use prettier words for the same ugly things so we don't feel quite as bad about them. Oh, I'm just procrastinating. Feels a lot better than being, I'm being slothful today. Imagine if you said that. Oh, you get that project done? Oh, I'm procrastinating a bit before I do it. You get that project done yet? No, I'm being slothful. Imagine if we talked like that. Probably stop being slothful or procrastinating more quickly. But the biggest thing with procrastination, which is a problem for me, I'm a huge procrastinator. But the reason procrastination works is because the reason that we are slothful is that we are afraid of doing the thing that we know we should be doing. We're afraid of doing the thing that we know we want to be doing. So we don't do it out of fear, because we're afraid of what will happen if we try. What will happen if we try and it's not good enough? What will happen if we try and we don't succeed? What will happen if we really do the things that you're supposed to do to get a big following on Spotify, or, get a blow up on TikTok or YouTube, or to finish your album, or, to open up for a big band, whatever your goals are, to land more clients. If we actually try to do the things we're supposed to do to get there, and then we didn't achieve them, oh my goodness, we'd feel so much worse, right? Than if we hadn't tried at all. Because at least when we're not trying at all, we can say, well, it's not my personal failing. I just didn't try. That's pride effing with us again, right? I probably could have done it if I tried, but I didn't try. So, whew, good thing for that. The only thing that has worked for me, and tell me if you have a better answer to this, because I hope that there is a better answer. But maybe this is the best we've got. The answer to being too afraid to do something, for me, has always been being too afraid not to do it. And that's where the tipping point, you felt this in your own life, this is where the tipping point in procrastination comes, where you actually do the thing that you should have been doing the whole time, is when you start being more afraid of the negatives that will accrue to you by not doing the thing than by doing it and failing. And that's one of the reasons I've switched to doing this in a live streaming format, because it helps me with my procrastination and my sloth. I'm like, I got to be there at a certain time. I've said I'll be there, and I've got to be ready at that time. Otherwise, I'm going to have an audience that goes like, where's that guy? Oh, he doesn't show up anymore. Was he not doing this anymore? I guess I'll go somewhere else for my fix. And I did the same thing with deadlines back when I wrote articles. When I was starting to write articles, I gave myself deadlines, and I was never a good person at being on time or getting things done on deadlines. But I was like, if I have a deadline and I'm more embarrassed about not meeting the deadline than I am about how bad the article comes out, then I will get it done. And by getting it done again and again and again and again, that's how I will get good. And that's how it works. That is how it works. Be more afraid of not doing the thing than you are afraid of doing the thing. And you have to figure out whatever it is, whatever it takes to make you feel that way. In school, for me, it was like, I never really ever did homework in school, but I would turn in just enough of like the big assignments that you're supposed to turn in that I would get like a C or a D, right? Here's how annoying I am. I would get like A's and A pluses on tests without studying because I'm annoying. And I would be like, I already know this stuff. I don't have to do any homework. I don't really care about what grades I get. I don't want to go to college anyway. I just want to rock. But then I would get F's if I didn't turn in anything. So I'd have to turn like one or two big final projects. And I was so afraid of like totally failing and not at least getting a C or like a D or something that I would finally turn the thing in. And I'm not saying this is the healthiest way to live. But whatever modest success I have in my life apparently has come from that ability to be more afraid of not doing the thing than of doing the thing. Man, I should psychoanalyze myself further in the show because this is an area where I could get way, 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 way better. All right. And then the last one here is wrath, anger. And I didn't know how to work this one into a podcast on music and audio production. Is anger holding us back? I really see the envy, the anger that comes from envy being something that holds us back. The anger that comes from lusting after something that we don't have and not wanting others to have it, that kind of anger. But maybe this is a blind spot for me. Because I will admit that sometimes some of my success has come from being angry. Sometimes when I do episodes like this, where it's the slap in the face that we all need, RJ Enriquez writes into the chat right now, this episode has been the best slap in the face I've gotten and needed lately, LOL. Some of my best episodes, at least my favorite ones to do, and sometimes my most popular ones, where I get angry. I go into rant mode, right? I go into rant mode about excessively high sample rates and how they don't do what people think that they do, provably. And me being angry at gear sluts is one of the reasons I became an audio journalist person to begin with and started writing about and interviewing and trying to find the scientific answers to and finding the best practices from all the greatest producers and engineers. One of the reasons I did that, I was so angry that gear sluts was like that was our primary mode of communication in the music production space for a number of years. And it was the exact moment where the whole industry was like imploding in on itself. And I'm like, how's this doing for us? How is this treating us? There's got to be something better. What's out there sucks and I can do better. And you've got to have a little bit of that in you to be a musician. You have to have, there's like this tiny bit of pride, right? And this tiny bit of anger. We're like, wait, they're successful. I could do that. Why them? Why not me? In fact, I have something even better to offer. And it is a disgrace and a dishonor and an injustice that it's not me. And I'm not just going to whine about it. I'm not just going to be envious. I'm not just going to be prideful. I'm going to get angry and I'm going to do something. That can be a powerful thing to move you forward. It can be. But I don't think that can power you forever. Like, it's the kind of rocket fuel that, yes, can help the spaceship, maybe burst out of the atmosphere. But you can't keep burning like that your whole life because it's not going to take you all the way to Mars. How's this analogy going? I made it up on the spot, I remember talking to the great Cameron, whose last name I don't know, of Venus Theory. I think his middle name is Venus and his last name is Theory, Mr. Theory. Cameron of Venus Theory. We had a great podcast interview episode with him. And he was talking about anger being a motivating factor in what he does creatively. And I was like, oh man, I could so relate to that. When I was starting to really get into the business of communicating about audio and music production, I was like, there are things unsaid that need to be said. There are things that people are saying wrong. There are things that people have wrong. There are priorities that are misplaced. I've got to go out there and do something about it. and I'd be angry about it. Doing an episode like this, it's about being angry at all the ways that I have failed, and I want to see you not fail. And that anger of like, how much I've had some modest success by some people's standards, not as much as some people have or as much as maybe I could. And I want to see you do better, and I'm angry about it. But you see how it starts to mix together all of a sudden. It's not just about anger. At a certain point, like you've got to be angry out of love. And I think that a modest amount of anger can be fuel. That anger that comes out of love, like I just wish that people understood this better. And the fact that they don't, and the fact that there's people misleading them makes me annoyed. That kind of anger that's fueled by love. Like love, what is love? Actually wanting the good for another. Willing the good of the other, I've heard it put. That's what love is. Love isn't a squishy feeling in your heart. It's willing the good of the other. It's a beautiful conception of what love is. If you have a little bit of that that's driving your anger, and that the anger comes from a place of love, then it can be useful. But this is another one where I think it's important to recognize what the opposite of the sin is. What is the virtue that is supposed to be the opposite of wrath, and the tradition that this comes from? What is the virtue opposite of wrath? Any guesses? It's patience. Wow. That was another cool one where I read that. Oh, the opposite of wrath is patience. And so often when we're angry with others, when we're angry with ourselves, it's because things aren't happening on the timetable that we wanted, in the way that we wanted. We want it to be done a certain way, a certain time. We want it to be done our way. And when you start getting there, when you start getting really wound up, if you can get to instead that point of patience, that is the antidote to wrath. And some of these things in here, wrath, greed, lust, envy, sometimes even pride, I've been talking about how they can keep us back from success. But another thing can happen that's even darker, which is that even obviously the successful have these traits. And sometimes for some people who succeed at what they wanted to succeed at, they were fueled by some of these sins, or probably better understood, they're not actions, these negative habits of mind. And if you get all the way to success because you're fueled primarily by any of these seven, pride, envy, lust, gluttony, greed, sloth, wrath, and you get to what you thought was going to be the promised land, fueled by one of these, you might find out it's not the promised land after all. So that's a caution. If envy is a motivator for you, and wrath isn't a motivator for you, if greed is a motivator for you, and they actually help you succeed, beware. And I think that comes back to the idea of greed valuing the outcome over the journey. Start valuing the journey over the outcome. And also of pride, really feeling like you know where you should wind up, and that you are the one with the master plan. Don't get me wrong, you should make plans, but that's a whole nother episode. I've actually got a great episode about it called You Will Become Your Plan B. Check that one out sometime. All right, thanks for joining me for this week's episode of the SonicScoop podcast. This has been Justin Colletti of SonicScoop. Check out our great full-length courses. Smash like, hit subscribe. Thanks to Soundtoys. Thanks to Lewitt. Thanks to Ultimate Support. Thank you to you for hanging out with me. Once again, this has been Justin Colletti of SonicScoop. See you next time.